Hey folks, today I want to talk about estimation. In fact, I want to teach you how to estimate software projects because I think it's a skill that a lot of developers are missing. In fact, I hear all kinds of excuses as to why developers don't want to or can't or any other number of negatives about estimation. 1. It's pointless. It's just a guess. It's not just a guess. When you are estimating appropriately, you are taking, to be fair, okay, yes, it is a guess, but it's an educated guess because you have some knowledge. You've done this before. You have experience. And you're taking advantage of that to figure out how long it's going to take you. It's not just a guess. 2. It's going to take the same amount of time either way. So why would I estimate it? Well, maybe. But there are a couple of major reasons why you still need to estimate it. We want to know how much this is going to cost. Before we agree to let you go do whatever it is we're doing, we want to know how much it's going to cost. That seems sensible to me. If I bring in a plumber, I want to know how much it's going to cost me before he starts tearing my house apart. I also might want to select something different. If I know for a fact that putting in that particular toilet is going to cost me £10,000, but I could get one that's almost the same for $2,000, I know which one I'm going to pick, and I want to know what my options are so I can make an educated decision. Estimation will tell me that. And beyond that, when you're working on a project, you need to know how many resources you need, how much time you need, when you can tell marketing that they can go off and do their thing. You need to know all these things, and if you don't have an estimate, you don't know any of these things, and you're just flying in the wind. 3, I love this one. It's impossible to estimate that. Okay, sometimes you might be working with things that you don't know or you don't understand well enough to make a really good estimate on it. But what you can do is you can look back on things that you have done before that you didn't know, you didn't fully understand, and figure out how much research you had to put into that, how much padding you had to put into that because things went wrong or things weren't what you expected them to be in the first place, and use that as a basis for your estimate. No, it's not going to be 100% perfect, but it's an estimate. It's not supposed to be. And 4. It will take me longer to estimate it than to do it. Okay, so if it's a 10-minute job, you might be right. But if it's longer than 10 minutes, no. Now, when it comes down to it, I think every single one of these arguments is really just somebody saying that they're either not comfortable with estimation, they're worried that they're going to estimate it wrong, or for whatever reason, they just don't like doing estimates. And I kind of get that. Certainly, when I started out my career in development, I hated doing estimates because I always assumed that if I got it wrong, somebody was going to be on my back about it, or that there was some magical number that I needed to get just right, or everybody would be angry, or that if I said this is going to take 2 weeks, I would be absolutely held to 2 weeks, and that would be it, and I would be the worst developer in the world if I didn't get it done in 2 weeks. So I can understand their point of view, but realistically, estimation helps us set expectations. It also helps us justify and explain when things do go wrong, because estimations help us show this is what we had in mind, and this is what happened, and this is why it happened that way. And by doing that, we're being a little bit more transparent. And being transparent makes people have a little bit more trust with you. And that's a fantastic thing. So what do you need to know how to estimate a piece of software? Well, there are a couple big things. Obviously, you need to know what it is you're building. If you don't know fully what you're building, then you're never going to be able to have a chance of estimating it accurately. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have it all written down in some massive sheet with a big list of stuff. In fact, that's probably going to make it even worse because it's really hard to estimate from a big sheet of stuff. And it doesn't make you flexible. It doesn't make you agile. It's not good in a lot of different ways. But what it does mean is that you need to fully understand not only what the goal of this is, but also what the processes are around it. That way, you know what could go wrong, how it's going to interact with other things, and exactly what it is you're trying to achieve with this. Not just a list of stuff that you're trying to build, but what you're trying to achieve by doing so. That will give you greater context into what it is that you're going to be building and what all the steps in that process are going to be. The other thing you really need to have a good grasp on is your team. Or yourself, if it's just you doing the work. Whoever's doing the work, you need to understand how quickly they do that work, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. And actually, this is a really great thing to know in general because obviously you want to give people the work that they have strengths in. You want to help them with things where they're weak. And knowing these things is going to help you with that, but but it's also going to make it easier for you to estimate, because you'll know if this person is really good at front end and I've got a fairly simplistic front end piece, it's not going to take them long. If this person really isn't that great at front end, but it's a really complex front end piece, that might take a long time. And it also gives you the opportunity to do some swapping. Maybe you don't want to give it to that person. You want to give it to the one who is really good at front end. Knowing your team or yourself makes it much easier to estimate. So this isn't just going to be me ramble on about estimation. I want to give you a concrete example of estimation in practice using a very, very simple fake situation that is quite similar to some things that I've had come across my desk before. So let's imagine, if you will, that the product support team has come to us and they want to be able to visually see a list of the complaints by product. Now, to give you a little bit of information here and fill in some gaps, we know for a fact that already all of the API and backend for this exists because it was created for another project. That means in this case, we're only going to be looking at front end. We also know that we've got the framework and an app already in place, so we're just going to be adding something new into that. What we don't know here is they said that they wanted this to be visually demonstrated, but they didn't actually say, does that mean tabular data, or do they want a chart, or do they want a combination of the two? And this is where it's really important that as the person doing the estimation, you make sure that you know what is going on, what the context is. So the first thing I would do is I would go down to the product support team and I would ask them, okay, so where are you going to display this data? How are you going to use it? What is it you're specifically looking for? Do you need to know it quickly? And I would get all of these questions out on the table and let them start to answer them. It might bring up things that they hadn't even considered before. And that will help me decide, okay, they do need a chart. I won't necessarily even ask them, do you need a chart? I will ask them the purpose behind it so I can see, okay, in this case, they want to display it on a giant TV in the middle of the room. So a chart's probably going to make the most sense because they're going to need to be able to see it from all the way across the other side of the room. I might also ask them how often they need this to be updated. Does this have to be absolutely real time? In this case, we'll say it doesn't have to be, and once an hour is probably good enough. All right, so I know exactly what they want it to look like. I know where the data is coming from, and I know that that already exists. And now I know that we need to update it once an hour. That's probably enough for this particular situation for me to go and start to build an estimate. Now, when I estimate things, I'm going to bring up a spreadsheet, but I don't always use a spreadsheet. Sometimes I'll just stick it in Notepad, or sometimes I'll write it down physically on a piece of paper. Sometimes I just do it in my head, depending on what it is. But I will start to break down the tasks that I know that I need to do. It might be high-level things. I might start to judge based on my previous experience with other similar things where I knew I had to create a chart. I'm just going to take my experience and apply that to a list of things that I think are involved. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and list out some of the things that I think I'm going to need to do for this. The first thing I need to do is I know I'm going to need to create some kind of a new view or module or something component or whatever it may be, depending on the framework I'm using, to house this. Quite often we need to use services or something to act as our liaison between our views and the API that we're going to be talking to. I'm going to need a chart, obviously. I'm going to need some kind of a mechanism to handle polling and checking once an hour to see if there's any updates. And that's probably most of what I need to build the app, but there are two important ones that I'm going to add in here. Sometimes I won't add this next one in as a line on its own. Sometimes I integrate it into the tasks themselves, particularly if it's a much bigger piece. But we need to write some unit tests. Unit tests are important. Some people don't agree, but I think most probably do because we know how things go in the real world. And then I'm going to add in some time for testing because the reality is if you don't budget it in there, it's going to get missed or somebody's going to be upset when you say, here it is, but now we need to spend 10 days testing it. It's just not going to end well. The whole point of this is to set expectations. So let's set them correctly in the first place. Now, I always estimate in hours, and I try to estimate no more than about half a day. So 4 hours is going to be the biggest number I ever put in here. If it's bigger than 4 hours, then I need to break it down even more. So let's say this is going to be about a quarter of an hour, half an hour, maybe an hour, a quarter of an hour, half an hour. And I usually go for about 25% on my testing. So let's say another half an hour. Let's say, for example, our chart data was bigger. Let's say it's 8 hours. What would I do with that one in particular? What I might do is we'll just come down here and I'll stick in some lines. I'll break that down a little bit. So first thing, maybe we don't have any charting libraries selected. That's part of the reason why it's going to take so long. So we need to do some research to research our charting libraries. We then need to add the chart. Then we need to map the data that we're getting from our API into the charting libraries and expected inputs. And then I'll break that down. So maybe this is 2 hours, 4 hours, 2 hours. That gets us our full 8. And I'll just get rid of that line. And now what I can do is just check to see. So I think this whole project, including testing, unit tests, everything, is going to take me about 10 hours. Now, I'm mostly just making these numbers up because I don't actually know what framework I'm going to be doing this in. I don't know any of those things at the moment because I just made all this up. But in the real world, you're going to know if you're using Angular or React or Vue.js or jQuery or no JavaScript framework at all, or you're building an iOS app or an Android app or whatever it might be. And you as a developer will have some experience and you'll understand what these pieces involve. When it comes down to it, estimation doesn't have to be anything big. It's really all about taking your experience, breaking down big tasks into small ones, and trying to get a really good idea of how long it's going to take you to do something. Because in general, even if you don't know how long the big task is going to take, you'll have done a lot of the small tasks in the past for other things, and you'll know how long it took you then. And as you do more and more estimation, you'll get much better at it. In general, it doesn't take me more than about 15 minutes to estimate a fairly sizable application. In fact, most of the time when I'm in a client meeting, I can ballpark estimate a full application or massive project all in my head without having to write anything down because I've done this so many times. And you will get to the point that this becomes first nature to you. It gets a lot easier. You start to know what numbers you want to stick in there. And sometimes it is a bigger project and you need to have some more columns. I know a lot of developers who like to add more columns. And I will sometimes. Sometimes I'll add a risk column to estimate how risky it is. Now, this isn't risky to the business, that's important, but risky to my estimate. So for example, in our case here, we were talking about charting libraries, and we said we might need to find one. And if we don't know what charting library we're working with, that's probably going to be a much higher risk than if we knew exactly what we were working with, and it's something that we work with every day. That would be a low risk because we know it. We understand what all the ins and outs of it are, and we have a pretty good idea of how long it takes us to build a new chart. That's really all there is to estimation. You can make it much more complex, and I know lots of people who use complex software packages and do all kinds of crazy things to try to figure out estimates, and sometimes that's appropriate. But in general, to get a rough estimate, this is going to be good enough. You just stick it in a spreadsheet or you stick it in Notepad for all we care. The only reason I stick it in a spreadsheet is so I can quickly see how many the totals are. That's really all there is to it. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and smash that bell to be notified when I post some new videos. Otherwise, check out our podcast at gettingappsdone.com. Until next time, thanks for watching.